Hello and welcome to my review of The Death of Grass by John Christopher. Christopher also wrote general fiction under his real name Sam Yude. In some markets, this book is called No Blade of Grass, but either way, it's a 1956 science fiction novel from the writer of The Tripods, and it describes the events that follow a viral outbreak in China that leads to a global crisis. Before we get into the plot, this is the obligatory reminder that you can skip this section using the slider or the chapters in the description, but no part of this review should be considered spoiler-free. The plot follows the family of John Custance. It begins when he is young and his grandfather, making out a will, leaves the family farm in Westmoreland to his brother David. The farm is good land in a valley that would, if needed, be easily defended. I wonder if that might come in handy later on. The story skips forward and John is now an engineer helping make large buildings as London is redeveloped. David has inherited the farm, but the brothers maintain a good relationship. Meanwhile, a virus that attacks rice has caused a famine in Asia. Hundreds of millions have starved despite the efforts of the rest of the world to help, and governments have dissolved there, leading to riots and anarchy. Of course, we British believe that it could never happen here, and if it did, our civilised resolve would get us through. John's friend Roger is a government spokesman, and they make a deal half seriously that should the worst come to the worst, Roger will give John early warning and the two will take their families north to David's farm. Soon there are rumours of various treatments being tested and effective, but oddly the virus mutates. Who knew that they could do that? And now it starts to attack grass. Most people are unconcerned, believing the government's scorched earth policy will keep things in check long enough for a counter-virus to be developed. David, the farmer, knows that the danger of grass dying is that livestock will soon follow, and is worried enough to invite John to come north straight away, but John declines. Soon, Roger reveals that the positive news coming out of the government is a sham. The virus has mutated again and is now attacking all forms of grass, including wheat, barley and other crops. The country is very likely to collapse, as much of Asia already has, and the government is planning nuclear strikes on the country's biggest cities to curb the excess population. Malthus, eat your heart out. Armed with foreknowledge, the families begin their flight even as the government orders a lockdown. Who knew they could do that? Dragging in an ex-army officer, Pirrie, the families make a break for freedom but are forced to kill some soldiers that are enforcing the lockdown. They begin their journey north, encountering all sorts of issues on the way, including thieves, rapists and other violent gangs, giving up their morals one by one as they travel. Unfortunately, on arrival in Westmoreland, they learn that there are others settled with David already, and having collected quite a few strays along the way, the valley can't support them all. With tempers rising, the two brothers will have to think of a way to solve that problem before it's too late. In The Death of Grass, John Christopher gets his pacing just about perfect. The looming crisis builds and builds as we learn more and more about the characters that are going to drive the story as it does. But the tension of the spread of the virus, the petty dealings of the government, always a step behind, the tissue of lies is so real, especially when we basically lived through something comparable. In the build-up at least. The death toll here is colossal. It is magnificent, all aside from the government's ultimate solution, which is a bit far-fetched. Firebombing the cities would be more likely than dropping nuclear weapons, with the resultant fallout and radiation likely to make Britain mostly uninhabitable anyway. When I was with the health service here in the UK, I was actually told by certain people that I met over the years what the government disaster plan actually was. And it is kind of what you think it would be. The people they deem important basically pull up the drawbridge on everybody else and ride it out, with the emergency services in the keep with the officials, because it's their job to clear up the bodies once the worst of it is over. And I think that with the Valley Farm being turned into a fortress, that would have been the most likely plan to protect perhaps a third of the country, where the arable land would support that amount of people, while the rest would be thrown out and left to fend for themselves. So that aspect of the story I thought was a little silly, but at the height of the Cold War it probably seemed far more real and far more threatening. But the country's descent into anarchy is extremely rapid and very bleakly portrayed. John and the small group of refugees have to kill to get out of the city. They are scarcely into the countryside before marauders relieve them of the majority of their possessions, and the rest of the story there details their travels across the country in search of sanctuary. It is relentlessly dark and strips away the layers of civilization very rapidly. Which, of course, is deliberate. Christopher was rather scornful of the prevalent idea that the people of Britain were some kind of cut above the rest of the world. He sets about destroying that idea very early in the piece. Roger, John's best friend and the government spokesman, has a habit of voicing his opinion. That irks John's wife. He is regarded as something of a throwback. His opinions are rarely politically correct, even for the 1950s, and he has a pretty bleak view of mankind, though rather crude. He isn't remotely bashful about the opinions he voices, or that they rub people up the wrong way. He's a dominant personality of the group of four, Roger, John and their wives, Olivia and Anne respectively. Forming the group, but for a toss of the coin, Roger would have led them, but John calls correctly and takes leadership. This is a group of people from the 50s, so they're practical, and John and the later recruit Pirrie are both military veterans. This doesn't stop the worst of humanity from preying on them as they cross the country. A local militia takes their vehicles and petrols, at that point preempting the coming crisis. Then both Anne and her and John's daughter Mary are raped by robbers, Anne traumatised both by the attack and her own brutal revenge. The military, the expected defenders of civilization, are shown as fallible as the others, and the group has a shootout with them in a remote farm as well. It is soldier turned pawnbroker turned kingmaker Pirrie that shows the civilization veneer is very thin indeed. He is, in the civilized streets of 1950s London, a cuckold, but clearly a consequentialist once removed from them. When his wife Millicent starts looking elsewhere, he murders her and takes, regardless of her wishes, the refugee Jane, a girl in her middle teens, as his new wife. All of this is done with the approval, tacit or explicit, of John, who has a daughter of similar age, but who also knows that Pirrie's psychopathic tendencies and military prowess is key to the group's survival. He becomes valuable enough to take his payment in any commodity that he chooses, and the women of the group are reduced to chattel. Conversely, Millicent's considerable power or value in the civilized world is reduced to zero once John is forced to choose between the necessary cold-blooded violence of Pirrie and the diplomacy of the others. The introduction promises that John Custance will be forced to choose between the survival of the group and his family, which ends up being a group of survivors cobbled together in a mutual need for numbers and weapons to ward off the marauders, or David, his brother. David, though, only appears on the fringe of the text, the first and last chapters. Between that, John's relationship with his immediate family is the driving force for all of the tough decisions he takes, even as that relationship is threatened by them. So if he'd had to choose between their well-being and the group's, it would have been a far tougher and darker and really fascinating ending to the book. The novel isn't just prescient in its exploration of viruses and governmental responses to them, it's also strikingly modern in its ecological and anti-colonial messages. This book was published in 1956, which is, I think, either the year after or the same year as the Suez Canal, which was the effective end of the British Empire anyway. But the spread of the virus is assisted worldwide by mono-farming, and the response of those in power, cover-ups and lies, delays and incompetence are chillingly real, while only serving to exacerbate the issue. The green and pleasant land of England is reduced to scorched brown hills as they, for all intents and purposes, pursue a scorched earth policy. Another policy, like the initial farming practices, designed to ravage the environment further. It is worth pointing out that modern farming is not 1956, but New Scientist published an article in just the last couple of weeks saying that modern farming was killing the planet. The views on Britain are remarkably modern as well. The stiff upper lip is much vaunted. The spirit of the Blitz would have only been a decade removed when Christopher was writing, but the myth is shattered rapidly. After observing the chaos unfolding abroad with scorn, our heroes are murdering and stealing with the best, or rather worst, of them. The country's collapse is immediate once the size of the threat is clear, but there is still time for tea. In conclusion, The Death of Grass is a great novel, building tension through a fraught beginning that leads to our heroes fleeing the city for their lives. They race across the country on a quest for sanctuary, and each step seems to peel away a level of civilization, and like McCarthy's The Road, they end up questioning if the people that started out are the same ones that will reach their goal. Are our heroes distinguishable from the villains anymore? It isn't just the similarities with the virus of unspecified origin that makes this 60-year-old text feel far more recent. Its critiques of environmental practice and the concept of national superiority also seem modern. If such things leave your eyes rolling, I'd assure you that the novel remains very readable anyway. But if they're dear to your heart, then this is definitely the book for you. In terms of depicting British post-viral societal collapse, this is up there with Survivors, but I would recommend Nation's Effort first. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe for more like this.